What's up, ladies and germs? This is Jelly Skeleton coming at you with another video where I just want to talk about why I believe the Necromancer is pretty imbalanced if you use this build that I am compared to any other build for it or any other class in the game, essentially. And the reason for this is just simply the numbers, right? So look at the damage numbers for most skills between most classes. They're comparable, with their main damaging power doing somewhere between 400 to 600% on hit, or maybe say like 1,000 over time, which again, this is over time and DPS is damage per second. So the average damage output in the game is based around that. And this is the reason this build is able to cruise the difficulties it can, is because Corpse Lance does 1750% weapon damage. That's insane. Something like Bone Spirit or Haunt, which is, the equivalent of a huge high damaging move, is only 4,000, which is higher than Corpse Lance, but we're talking about a move that can only be used periodically versus a move that you are able to use a lot more often. But that's not the sole factor that attributes to this build and the Necromancer in general having ridiculous damage. Let's take Siphon Blood, for example. That is 300% weapon damage. That's already very high for a basic attack skill in this game. Now, combining that with the fact that it can be channeled alongside of the Skeletal Mages, which do 400% per hit, but they're out hitting multiple times, and you can build up a wall of them, as you can see, to where they're spitting this damage out constantly, as opposed to something like Bone Spear or Death Nova, where every time you press the button is every time you're getting that, say Bone Spear 450% damage, as opposed to this just continuously happening. On top of that, they're generating resources for you to use the Corpse Lances, so you've got to understand that their damage is actually way higher than 400% because they allow you to hit that 1750 way more often. And I believe the developers must have balanced that 1750 around the fact that corpses are, a scarce-ish resource. But with this build, they're not, and therefore you're able to hit that 1750 way more often, and there's just simply no other class that has the ability to hit a number like that with any kind of regularity from an attack that isn't an ultimate or their equivalent of Bone Spirit or what have you. So as a result, you're able to actually be damaging enemies that really, realistically, you shouldn't be being able to damage. And this is just a really weird balancing issue, because if you got to think about it this way, right? You're stacking 300 damage percent from your Siphon Blood on top of the 400 every second, which is then stacking up to 10 times, right? So that's ridiculous right there. The command skeletons are constantly hitting for another 350 per attack. That's 50 times 7. And then periodically you're able to throw in that Corpse Lance, which then stacks that damage even further, on top of being able to use the Frailty Curse to increase your mana damage by 15%. You're already getting crazy damage from these Skeletal Mages, and the fact that it will end an enemy's life once they've reached only 15% health left, which, when their health numbers are so high and take so long to bring down even that much of a life bar, that's actually incredibly significant. So the Necromancer has all these ways of stacking damage together and manipulating damage in ways that no other class can do, and as a result it can do this. And I really am trying to crunch the numbers in my head, and I don't see how any other class or build would be able to even push something like this, just due to the humongous discrepancy in the numbers. And let's even take Army of the Dead as an example, right? That's the ultimate that just does a crap ton of damage. It does 12,000% weapon damage, which is like, okay, at first you think that's insane, right? Like, that dwarfs everything. Mind you, it's once every 120 seconds, but let's just say you could hit it all the time, right? Well, Land of the Dead is better because its damage is way more. You can probably spam Corpse Lance at least 20 times underneath Land of the Dead, and that's going to put you well over that 12,000% weapon damage, right? So in theory, Land of the Dead has the potential to do way more, just because of the fact that they balance the game, they balance the Corpse Lance around the fact that corpses are a rare resource, but if you make them a not rare resource, it kind of breaks it. And the fact that Corpse Lance homes in on the enemy from across the map, meaning the stipulation of the corpse being next to the enemy is no longer there, and all this and that. In Diablo 4, for example, you can create a ton of resources, corpse-wise, very easily, but Corpse Lance doesn't exist in the game, so your ability to utilize and leverage these resources is much more minimal. So that essentially is, in a nutshell, why I feel like the developers kind of had an oversight when it comes to the Necromancer and how you can kind of stack the abilities, stack the damage this way, on top of the fact that the skeletons are ridiculously tanky in themselves, allowing you to survive way more than any class normally would be, because enemies are attacking them and not you. If all these enemies were focused on me, I would stand no chance. So because of all the way these things stack together, all of these elements that need to be in place that just happen to be as a result of how this class is, kind of makes it an absurdly broken class in this build. If you build just the normal Nova build or some other thing, it's going to function like any other class in the game. But just due to the simple fact of the numbers and the way they add up, when you factor in all these factors, is just ridiculous. This has been Jelly Skeleton. Sit and spin, my fine friends.